I was his woman long before I understood what that really meant. Not girlfriend, not wife, not mistress. His woman, the shadow walking beside a ghost. You know his name already. Matteo Messina Denaro. The newspapers called him Diabolique, the last godfather, the invisible boss. To the world, he was a legend. To the police, he was a phantom. To the people of Castelvetrano, he was a whisper no one dared to speak. And to me, he was just Matteo, the man who touched my wrist in a crowded market and changed the rest of my life. So sit with me for a while. Forget the headlines, the documentaries, the dramatized series. This is not about Cosa Nostra. This is not about mafia myths and bloody legends. This is about a woman who fell in love with a man and woke up next to a monster, my monster. And the day I watched him fall. 1. The first time I saw him. I remember the oranges. It's strange. The things your brain keeps when so much else becomes a blur. Not the outfit I wore, not what I'd eaten, not even what year it was exactly. Just the oranges. Huge, heavy Sicilian oranges, piled high on a wooden cart in the market square, burning in the sun like small suns. I was 18, sweating in a cheap cotton dress, arguing with the vendor about the price. "You're robbing me," I told him. "And you," he replied, "are not from around here if you're paying full price." I rolled my eyes, reached for a fruit, and my hand slipped. One orange rolled, then another, until the whole pyramid gave up and cascaded onto the hot stones. I froze. The vendor cursed. People laughed. And someone's hand caught my elbow before I could trip over the mess I'd made. "Careful," a deep voice said, with a hint of amusement. "You already started a revolution. No need to declare war on gravity, too." I looked up. He was not what I expected. Not tall and handsome in the movie star way. Number. He was lean, with sharp features, dark glasses, and a smile that didn't quite show his teeth. His hair was gelled back, his shirt casual, but expensive. Quietly expensive. His watch alone probably cost more than I'd ever held in my life. He bent down, picked up 2 oranges, and set them back on the cart. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, cheeks burning. He shrugged. "Things fall," he said. "What matters is who helps you pick them up." I should have known from that line that he was dangerous. Instead, I laughed. That was my first mistake. "Matteo," he said, offering his hand. "Alessia," I replied. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady. And something started that day that would take me more than 20 years to understand. 2. The men they warned us about. In Sicily, we grow up with stories. Stories of men who talk softly but make people disappear. Men who sit at the back of cafes, never paying, never being asked to pay. Men whose names unlock doors and lock coffins. We don't say Mafia out loud, not really. We say Loro. Them. Everyone knows who they are. No one ever points. My father used to tell me, "Stay away from men in sunglasses in the shade." At 12, that sounded poetic. At 20, I understood. But when I met Matteo, every warning turned into a joke in my head. He wasn't loud. He didn't drive some flashy car. He didn't shout into phones or throw money around. He was careful, controlled. He'd show up at the cafe where I worked, always sitting at the same corner table, never facing the door. He drank espresso like it was ritual. Black, no sugar. Sweetness is your job. He'd tease me, eyes glinting. I should have walked away. I should have refused his tips that were always too generous. I should have asked why no one ever asked him for payment, why the owner smiled nervously every time he came in. Instead, I memorized his order. I learned the small crease by his mouth when something truly amused him. I noticed the way people moved around him. Not like he was important, but like he was dangerous. And I mistook my fear for excitement. That was my second mistake. One night, he waited for me outside, leaning against the stone wall. I remember the lamppost buzzing, the cats in the alley, the way my heart hammered just seeing his silhouette. "You shouldn't walk home alone," he said. "I always walk alone," I answered. "Not anymore." Just like that. No request, no question. A choice made. For me. I let him. That was my third mistake. You see, it's easy to judge from far away. You think, if I knew a man was dangerous, I'd run. But danger wrapped in charm doesn't smell like blood at first. It smells like safety. 3. The rumors. I found out who he was the way everyone finds out in towns like ours. I overheard it. I was in the back of the cafe, scrubbing wine glasses, when the news came on the old TV in the corner. The anchor's voice was dull, practiced, like talking about monsters, was routine. Ricercato da Trentani, boss mafioso, Matteo Messina Denaro. They showed an old photo of him, younger, fuller cheeks, that same strange half smile. A grainy picture that looked nothing like the man who just left his half-drunk espresso on table 7. The owner, Johnny, turned up the volume. "Still at large," the anchor went on. "Thought to be the head of—" Johnny cursed under his breath. "Siamo in mano al diavolo." We're in the devil's hands. One of the regulars laughed bitterly. "You think he's far?" "He's probably drinking coffee 2 streets away." They laughed nervously. I froze, rag in hand, heart pounding. Number. It couldn't be. There were many Mateos, many men with slicked hair and dark glasses, right? I stepped closer to the TV, the glass in my hand squeaking. The photo lingered. That was his nose. That was his jaw. That was his mouth. Same man, different decade. Gianni caught me staring. He watched me with those tired eyes, and I saw a flash of something there. Pity. "Alessia," he said gently, "some men you admire from far away. You don't get close to them." My throat went dry. He didn't say Mateo's name. He didn't have to. I walked home that night with my mind racing, my father's warnings echoing, the news voice repeating, "Ricercato, boss, stragi, murders, extortion, bombs, dead judges." And yet, when I turned the corner and saw him waiting in the shadows, leaning against a car, my feet didn't run. My heart did, but toward him. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to decide whether to kiss me or arrest me." I should have confronted him. Instead, I swallowed the truth like a stone. Because here's the thing. Monsters don't always look like monsters. when they're the only ones who've ever held you like you mattered. 4. The confession he never really made. I carried the truth around for weeks like a burning coal in my pocket. I read every article I could secretly steal. I listened when people talked in low voices. I learned the stories, the bombs in the early 90s, the judges, Falcone, and Borsellino, blown to pieces, the murders of officials, rivals, traitors, the businessmen who paid protection or disappeared. His name was always there, floating like smoke. Matteo Messina Denaro, the ghost, the fugitive. One evening, we sat on a hill overlooking the vineyards, the sky bleeding into rose and gold. He had his arm around me, fingers idly tracing circles on my shoulder. I know who you are, I said suddenly. He didn't flinch. He just kept staring at the horizon. Everyone knows who I am, he replied. No, I whispered. I mean, I know who you really are. He looked at me then, his eyes very still. And who am I, Alessia? Don't make me say it. He studied me, then sighed, a soft, tired sound. Do you think, if you say the word, lightning will strike? He asked. Do you think I'll turn into dust? It's not a game, I snapped, pulling away. People died. Many people. He looked back at the horizon. People always die, he said. The only question is why. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away. Instead, my voice came out smaller than I meant. Did you do it? The things they say? He was silent for a long minute. Then he reached into his pocket, took out a cigarette, lit it with a practiced flick. You're asking me for a confession, he said quietly. You want me to put blood on your hands with my words. I want the truth. No, he said, shaking his head. You want comfort. Two kinds of comfort. Either, no, I didn't. I'm innocent. So you can love me without guilt. Or, yes, I did. I'm a monster. So you can walk away without regret. He blew out smoke. But the truth? He shrugged. The truth is not for comfort. I stared at him, heart pounding. Is this a joke to you? I shouted. Men died. Children. Judges. For what? For power? For money? He turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind his eyes. Those were years of war, he said through his teeth. You weren't there. Then tell me, I demanded. Tell me what you did. He looked at me for so long, I felt my pulse in my ears. Finally, he said, I did what I thought I had to do. I cannot be the man I am and the man you want. You must decide which one you love. That was not an answer. And yet, it was. Because he didn't deny anything. I should have walked away forever that night. Instead, like a fool, I stayed. The heart doesn't obey logic, especially when it's young, especially when it's already in too deep. 5. Life in the shadows. Loving a fugitive is a strange kind of prison. There are no bars, no guards, no official sentence, just rules, no photos, no social media, no talking about him to anyone, not friends, not family. Meeting places always changing, phones always disposable, names always shifting. I became Sophia in one apartment, Rosa in another, La ragazza di quell'uomo in whispers. We never stayed anywhere too long. Sometimes he'd vanish for days, weeks. No explanation, no warning. I learned not to ask. When he was there, he was entirely there, talking with me until sunrise, cooking simple meals, reading newspapers out loud in a mocking tone, the way some men read football commentary. When he was gone, he became something else. A name on the news, a ghost in rumors, a shadow in my mind. I split him in two. Matteo, the man who made me laugh, who traced lines on my palm and pretended to read my future, and Messina Denaro, the boss, the fugitive, the man whose orders left graves behind. My love belonged to the first, my nightmares to the second, but they were always the same man. Sometimes at night, he'd wake up suddenly, breathing hard. I'd place my hand on his chest and feel his heart racing like it was trying to outrun something inside him. "What are you afraid of?" I'd whisper. "Nothing," he'd reply. But his arms would tighten around me like I was his lifeline. And in the dark, with his face pressed against my hair, I'd think, monsters don't always sleep well. 5. Being the boss's wife without saying the word. Boss. You might imagine luxury, gold, lace, private jets. You would be wrong. His power did not show up as extravagance. It showed up as ease. The way bank managers smiled too wide when I walked in. The way bureaucratic problems evaporated. The way my son's school miraculously found a place in an overcrowded class. The way my mother's neighbor, who had insulted us once, suddenly moved to another town overnight. These were the invisible threads of his influence, threads that wrapped around everything. I lived in the house we had shared until it became too risky. Then I moved, then moved again. Always in small ways, always under pretexts that would not attract attention. Closer to my aunt, I would say. Better for the children's school, I would lie. But the truth was simple. The closer the police got, the farther I had to move. Sometimes a neighbor would lower their voice and ask, "Have you heard from your husband?" I'd shrug, eyes downcast. "No," I'd say. "He left." He was a difficult man. They would nod with sympathy. Men, they would sigh. They never know what they have. If only they knew. I learned to live in layers. On the surface, a woman whose husband had abandoned her. Underneath, a woman whose husband ruled an empire of fear and loyalty from some hidden farmhouse an hour away. The children grew up in the shadow of a father they rarely saw. When they were barely old enough to understand, I gave them the script. If anyone asks about Papa, I told them, you say he went away for work. "What work?" my son asked. "Farming," I said. He laughed. "Papa doesn't like cows." "Exactly," I replied. "That's why they'll believe it." They did, for a while. But children aren't blind, and Sicily isn't kind. At school, they heard the whispers. At the bar, they saw the men who lowered their voices when our name was mentioned. "Is it true?" my daughter asked me one evening, eyes too old for her age. "Is Papa with them?" The word hung between us. I took a deep breath. "Your father," I said carefully, "is a man who made choices. Some of them helped people. Some of them hurt people. Her chin trembled. Is he a bad man? She whispered. In that moment, I hated him. Not for what he had done, but for what he had turned me into. The woman who had to explain morality to children in shades of gray. I thought of the envelopes that had appeared when my father was sick, the jobs he had arranged for my brother's friends, the loans forgiven, the debts collected in ways too final to describe. I think, I said slowly, that your father is a man who believed he could fix the world in his own way. Did he? She asked. I looked out the window at a Sicily no less corrupt, no less violent, no less afraid. No, I said. I don't think he did. 6. The hunt. For years, the news was like a ticking clock in the background. Provenzano still at large. Authorities tighten the noose. Another hideout discovered. The boss slips away. We kept the television low, but never off. Every time they mentioned his name, I felt my heart twist. Not with fear of his capture, but with a strange, bitter mix of relief and dread. I didn't know which scared me more, that they would find him, or that they wouldn't. Once, they raided a house not far from where we lived. They found nothing, but they left the door broken, the furniture smashed, the family shaken. I went to bring them food. We didn't even know him, the wife sobbed. We just rented this place. They say he was here, but I never saw him. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe not. In our world, truth is always a matter of perspective. What I do know is this. Every time the police knocked on the wrong door, every time they looked under the wrong bed, my husband changed houses, changed routes, changed everything. What kind of life is that, you might ask? I asked too. Many times. Once, when we met in a safe house, a small farmhouse that smelled of damp and old coffee, I finally let the words spill out. Is it worth it? I demanded. This? Living like a rat in the walls? Never seeing your children? Never sleeping in the same bed twice? Is this what you wanted? He looked older than I remembered, lines carved deeper into his face, hair thinner, eyes more tired. I wanted to survive, he said, quietly. I wanted you to survive. I laughed, bitter. Survive? I spat. You call this survival? Being afraid of every car that slows down, of every helicopter overhead. He lit a cigarette with steady hands. Freedom is an illusion, he said. We are all trapped somewhere. Some are trapped in poverty, some in fear, some in prisons made of concrete, others in prisons made of power. And ours? I asked. What is our prison made of? He looked at me with something like regret. Of love, he said, and of everything I've done in its name. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that love did not need to be bathed in blood, that protection did not mean control, that family was not an excuse for every sin. But I didn't. Because despite everything, despite the empty chair and the lies, and the raids, and the whispered names of men who never came home, I still loved him. And that was my prison. 7. The day the ghost was caught. April 11th, 2006. I remember the date the way other women remember their wedding anniversary. By then, we lived in yet another house, in yet another town that pretended not to know who we were. The children were grown. One had left Sicily altogether, trying to build a life outside the shadow of their father's name. The other stayed, stubborn, insisting that if we ran from our past, we would never stop running. It was a Tuesday. The day started like any other, which is to say, with tension threaded through the most ordinary tasks: coffee, bread, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of a motorcycle passing too slowly outside. I was hanging laundry when I heard it. The staccato roar of multiple engines, cars, many of them. My heart made that familiar, sickening jump. I stepped to the window. Police, not a casual patrol, not a random check. This was a swarm. They weren't coming to my house. Not yet. They sped past toward the countryside, sirens off, lights flashing. I felt it in my bones before the news confirmed it. They had found him. Later, they would say it had taken them 43 years to catch him, that he was in a farmhouse, not so different from the 100 others they had searched, that he did not resist, that he looked old, frail, almost ordinary. I watched the footage in my living room, fingers dug into the arms of my chair. There he was, my husband, hair thin and white, face gaunt, glasses perched on his nose, like a retired accountant dragged from his office. They led him past cameras, past microphones, past the curious eyes of people who had whispered his name for decades. For a moment, it looked like he might fall. A policeman grabbed his arm. He straightened. His eyes behind the glasses were the same. Quiet, sharp, watching everything. He did not look for me. He did not know where I was, and that was by design. We had cut those threads years earlier for safety, but I knew he must have wondered. Did they find her too? Are the children safe? Has everything I did to protect them failed? He had always believed he could control the game, even when he was forced to play from hiding. But this was the moment when the game ended. The police searched the farmhouse and found what I knew they would. Not guns, not gold, paper. Hundreds of pizzini carefully stored, coded, organized. The veins of an empire sketched in tiny, precise letters. Names, numbers, instructions, favors to be granted, debts to be collected. His whole kingdom, reduced to scraps of paper. The newspapers called it a treasure trove, a map to dismantle the organization he had so carefully maintained. I called it something else. His legacy. Not the one he wanted, but the one he left. 8. The visits. They took him to a high-security prison. For weeks, I did not go. People said I was heartless, that I had abandoned my husband in his old age, left him to rot. Others said I was smart, that I should have left him years ago. No one understood. How could they? How do you explain the way love and anger can coexist in the same heart, tangled like vines? How do you explain that you can hate what a man has done and still remember the way he smiled when he first held your newborn child? In the end, I went, not for him, for me. The first time I saw him through glass, I almost did not recognize him. Prison had a way of flattening him, shrinking him. The walls, the bars, the fluorescent lights, they took the mystery away. This was not a ghost, not a myth, not a boss of bosses or accountant of death. This was an old man in a brown sweater, hands spotted with age, veins bulging, eyes still. Him. Buongiorno, he said softly. Buongiorno, I replied. We picked up the phone. The plastic felt cold against my ear. You look well, he lied. You look terrible, I told him. He laughed, and for a moment, it was like we were back in our first apartment. Before the power, before the hiding, before the headlines. They treat you well? I asked. As well as they treat anyone they hate. He shrugged. But they are professional. I didn't want details. I had seen enough stories about prison to know that professional could mean many things. How are the children? He asked. They live their lives, I said. One is abroad, one is here. Both are angry. With you? He asked. I looked at him, incredulous. With you? I said. With me. With Sicily. With God. With fate. Take your pick. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. I never wanted this for them, he muttered. No, I said. You just chose a life that made it inevitable. He flinched slightly. You think I had a choice? He asked quietly. You always had a choice, I replied. You may not have liked the options, but you had them. He sighed, a sound heavy with years. I did what I thought was necessary, he said. For who? I pressed. For us? For the organization. For your pride. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, he answered. For all of it, he said. For a world I believed in. A world where order was enforced when the state failed. A world where debts were paid and respect meant something. And now? I asked. What do you believe in now, sitting in that cell? He looked at me with those same quiet eyes now clouded by age. I believe, he said slowly, that every empire ends. Some in fire, some in paperwork. Mine will end in both. He tried to smile. And you? He asked. What do you believe in now that you are free of me? I hesitated. For years, my life had revolved around his absence, his wants, his rules. Even when he wasn't physically present, he was a weight in every decision. I believe, I said finally, that I have one life. And I have spent most of it loving a man who belonged to everyone but me. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. Low so, he murmured. I know. We sat there, the glass between us reflecting our blurred faces, like two ghosts haunting the same house. When the guard tapped the glass to signal the end of visiting time, he leaned forward. Take care of them, he said. Our children, our grandchildren. Tell them I. He stopped himself. The words tangled in his throat. He had ordered murders with less hesitation. But he could not say, I'm sorry. He never did. 9. The weight of his name. After his arrest, our phone stopped ringing. The men who had once bowed their heads when I entered a room crossed the street to avoid me. Politicians who had smiled at my husband pretended not to recognize me. Journalists circled like vultures, their questions sharp and hungry. Did you know? They asked. How much did you know? Did you profit from his crimes? Were you afraid of him? I wanted to scream. Do you ask every wife if she knows every detail of her husband's business, every late invoice, every unethical decision, every corner cut? Oh, but that's different, isn't it? This is Mafia. This is romantic, cinematic, soaked in cheap cigar smoke and gunpowder in your imagination. You want me to tell you I knew it all and loved him anyway, or that I knew nothing and was an innocent lamb. You want a simple story. You will not get one. Here is the truth. I knew enough. Enough to know when his hands were stained. Enough to know when a man at a funeral was there by his design. Enough to know that when a certain family suddenly left town, they had not done so voluntarily. But I also knew this man, the one who sat with our son when he was sick, reading him stories in a low voice, the one who helped my mother to the bathroom when her legs gave out, the one who brought home fresh figs in his pockets, because he remembered how I loved them as a girl. Both men lived in the same body, and I was married to both. That is the weight of his name. In the street, I would hear it spat like poison. In my heart, I heard it whispered like a prayer I didn't know whether to trust. Provenzano. For some, his capture meant justice. For others, it meant the end of something they believed in, twisted as that belief might seem. For me, it meant this: no more waiting for footsteps that might be his, no more flinching at sirens, no more pretending our children's father was just away for work. He was no longer a ghost, he was a prisoner. And in that strange transformation, I found a sliver of freedom. 10. The last time I saw him. It was a few years before he died. By then, his health had deteriorated. The newspapers said he was no longer the powerful puppet master, just an old man fading in a cell. Some argued he should be released on compassionate grounds. Others argued he deserved to die where he was. I went to see him one last time, against my better judgment. The prison smelled of disinfectant and despair. The guards knew me by then. Some were courteous, some were not. They led me to the visiting area. He was wheeled in, a wheelchair. The man whose name had once made grown men tremble now needed help to sit upright. His hands shook, his eyes were cloudy, but when he saw me, something like recognition flickered. "Say too," he whispered. "It's you." I sat down, picked up the phone. "It's me," I said. We talked of small things at first: the weather, the grandchildren, the town. He asked about the lemon tree in our old garden. "And Coralie?" he asked. "Is it still there?" "Yes," I said. "It still gives fruit." He closed his eyes as if picturing it. That tree we had planted together in the early days, when we still believed we could grow something sweet in a bitter soil. There was a long silence. "I have been thinking," he said finally, voice thin, "about the word regret." I blinked. "You?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "Thinking about regret?" He gave a weak imitation of a smile. "Even monsters think," he rasped. "At least, that's what they say I am." "What do you regret?" I asked. He stared at his spotted hands. "I regret," he said slowly, "that I could not keep my worlds separate." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I thought," he said, "that I could build a wall between what I did outside and what I was at home. That I could be the man they needed and the man you loved. He shook his head, the movement barely perceptible. But walls crack, he continued. Pieces fall through. Fear seeps under doors. Blood leaves stains. Images flashed in my mind. The night our son came home, bruised because someone at school had called him son of a mafioso. The day my daughter smashed a plate and screamed she would never marry, never have children, because she refused to give them this name. The way I had watched the news in secret, praying his enemies wouldn't come for us. Yes, I said, it seeps. I do not regret protecting my people, he said stubbornly, the old hardness surfacing for a moment. I do not regret standing against those who would. He trailed off, breath catching. He looked at me with sudden, raw vulnerability. But I regret, he whispered, that I made you pay the price. Tears stung my eyes. You cannot divide a man into parts, I said quietly. You cannot say, this part is for my family, this part is for my work, this part is for my sins. You are one person, Bernardo. We lived with all of you, the good, the bad, the unforgivable. His jaw trembled. Can you? He swallowed. Can you forgive me? The question hung there, heavy, impossible. I thought of the years, the fear, the lies, the empty chair. I thought of the envelopes that had saved my father, the jobs he had found for desperate men, the way he had held our newborn daughter as if she were the only pure thing left in his stained world. I don't know, I said honestly. Some days, I think I have. Other days, I hope I never do, because I'm afraid forgiving you means saying it was all somehow worth it. He nodded slowly. That is fair, he said. We sat in silence. Finally, he spoke again. I know they will remember me as a monster, he said. They will write books, make movies, say I was this or that. They will never know the full truth. None of them ever do. Not even the judges. Not even the ones who worked with me. He looked at me, eyes suddenly clear. You, he said, you knew more of me than anyone. The only one who saw both men. I took a deep breath. Yes, I said, and that is my curse. He smiled, sad. Or your power, he said. You decide how to tell it. When visiting time ended, I stood. He reached out, hand trembling against the glass. Addio, he said softly. Not arrivederci, not see you again. Addio. Goodbye. I pressed my hand to the same spot. Addio, I replied. I walked out of that prison lighter and heavier at the same time. 11. After the monster. When he died, the news came not from the prison, but from the television. I was washing dishes. The voice of the newsreader drifted in from the living room. Bernardo Provenzano, the once feared boss of Cosa Nostra, has died today at the age of... The words blurred. I turned off the tap, walked into the living room. There he was again. That same photograph they always used. The one where he looked like a disapproving schoolteacher, gaze sharp, mouth set. The world reacted as expected. Politicians made statements. Journalists recapped his crimes. Old men at the bar nodded, sipping their coffee. Some people cheered quietly, others crossed themselves. I sat down, waited for the wave of grief, or relief, or something. What came instead was a strange, hollow quiet. For decades, he had been a presence even in his absence, a shadow over every decision, a question mark over every knock on the door. Now, that shadow had gone. Just like that. The phone rang. It was my daughter. "Mama," she said, voice tight. "Have you heard?" "Yes." Silence. "What do we do?" she asked like a child again. I looked around my small kitchen. The worn table, the chipped cups, the lemon I had cut for tea. "We live," I said. "We keep living." He had taken much from us, but he had not taken that, not permanently. The world moved on. New scandals, new bosses, new headlines. But in the town, in the villages, in the little corners of Sicily where his name was once spoken with reverence or fear, his ghost lingered. Some saw him as a necessary evil, others as a cancer finally cut out. I saw him as my greatest love and my greatest mistake. And so, one evening, I did something I had not done in years. I went back to the old church, the same one where we lit that first candle, where we married, where once I had prayed for his safety and our protection. I bought a candle, lit it, stood in the flickering glow. "Not for your soul," I muttered softly, half to him, half to God. "I leave that to someone else to judge." I lit it for something else, for the girl I had been, the one who looked at a quiet-eyed boy and saw not danger, but destiny, the one who believed she could love a man and not inherit his wars, the one who thought she could build a home on a fault line and not feel the tremors. "I forgive you," I whispered, surprising myself. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Because I wanted to walk into whatever time I have left without dragging his chains behind me. "I forgive you," I said again. And the strangest thing happened. I felt lighter, not fixed, not healed, not erased, but lighter. Outside, the sky was turning that deep Sicilian blue that makes you forgive the land almost anything. I walked home slowly, past the piazza where boys with two bright eyes and two big dreams leaned against scooters laughing, past the bar where men still talked in low voices, past the old fountain where women gossiped and rinsed their vegetables, as they always had. The world he tried to control still spun. The system he had fed and been fed by still pulsed beneath the surface. It would not end with him. Or with me. But my part in his story? That, at least, I could close. Which is why I am telling you this. Not as a confession, not as an excuse, but as a warning. When you see pictures of men like him on the news, remember, behind every monster, there are people who once loved him. Wives, mothers, children, people who lived with the man behind the myth. We are the ones who bear the quiet cost. And sometimes, only sometimes, we are the ones who finally choose to lay it down. 12. Why I'm telling you this. You might ask, why now? Why speak after all these years? Why drag it all back into the light? Because silence is what kept him powerful for so long. Silence is what protected him. Silence is what protected those who used him. Silence is what suffocated us. I am old now. I have fewer years ahead of me than behind. For so long, I swallowed my story, told myself it was safer that way. For the children, for me, for whatever fragile piece I had left. But when I look at my grandchildren, at their phones, at the world they scroll through, at the stories they believe, I worry. I worry they will only remember the headlines, the myths, the Netflix versions with handsome actors and dramatic music. I want them to know the other version, the one where the boss's wife hangs laundry while listening for sirens, where the children flinch when someone knocks too hard, where security is paid for in sleepless nights and checked windows. So I speak. I speak for every woman who has loved a dangerous man and convinced herself she could stay separate from his sins. For every mother who has watched her children carry the weight of a father's choices. For every Sicilian who has been told loyalty means silence, even when that silence corrodes everything it touches. This is my story. The story of the man the world knew as Bernardo Provenzano. The story of the woman who stood beside his shadow and tried, desperately, to find the edges of her own. You want to know what it was like? It was like loving a ghost who could move mountains with a whisper, a ghost who could make money appear and people disappear, a ghost who believed he was protecting us, even as he built the cage we lived in. Would I do it again if I could go back? If you had asked me that when I was 17, standing in that church with a candle, I would have said yes without hesitation. Ask me now? Number. I would tell that girl to run, to choose the boy who is simply kind, not powerful, the one whose hands smell like engine oil or flour, not gunpowder and fear, the one whose name, when spoken, tastes like joy instead of danger. But I cannot go back. All I can do is speak to you, to them, to anyone who will listen. So here it is, laid bare. I was his wife. I watched him rise from a quiet boy in the piazza to the invisible ruler of an empire built on fear. I watched the police hunt him, the world speculate about him, the judges sentence him. I watched him grow old in a cell, and I watched him die on a television screen. And in the end, I realized something simple and terrible. The real prison was never the one with bars. It was the one he built inside all of us. And the only way out was to stop loving the ghost more than I loved myself. That is the truth. That is my freedom. And now that you know, maybe, just maybe, some other girl lighting a candle in some other church will hear this and make a different choice. Maybe. I can only hope. 6. My father's eyes. My parents thought I was working in another town. I let them believe that. It was easier than explaining why their daughter could only visit every few months, why she never brought her boyfriend home, why she always looked over her shoulder walking through the village. One afternoon, my father met us by accident. We were at a roadside cafe on the way to nowhere. He'd promised me a drive, just us, somewhere with good arancini. We were sitting at a plastic table, the sun glaring off the hood of the car, when I heard my father's voice. At my age, espresso is the only thing that hasn't betrayed me, he joked to the waiter. I froze. Matteo sensed it immediately. "What's wrong?" he murmured. "My father," I whispered. "He's here." His body went still. I turned just as my father spotted me. "Alessia?" He blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Figlia mia, what are you doing here?" He walked towards us, happiness written across his weathered face. Behind him, Matteo's expression rearranged itself, like a mask sliding into place. I stood up. "Papa, I was just—" My father's eyes moved from me to Matteo. They narrowed. In that moment, I saw recognition. Not from newspapers, from life. My father had grown up in this world of whispers, too. He knew what certain men looked like, even if they never said their names. "Buongiorno," my father said stiffly. "Buongiorno, signore." Matteo replied politely, standing, offering his hand. My father stared at it for a heartbeat too long, then shook it. "What brings you here?" he asked me, but his eyes never left Matteo. "I was just having a coffee with a friend," I stammered. "A friend," my father repeated slowly. I wanted the ground to swallow me. After some brief, tense small talk, my father left with his espresso in a paper cup. He didn't hug me. He didn't kiss my cheek. He just looked at me with eyes that were wounded and furious all at once. "I'll see you at home," he said. We watched him drive away. Matteo lit a cigarette. "Your father is a wise man," he said, quietly. "He hates you," I whispered. "He's not wrong." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Do you hate me too, now?" he asked. I wanted to say yes. Instead, my voice came out as a broken truth. "I don't know how to stop loving you." That night, my father slapped me for the first time in my life. Not because I loved a man, but because I loved that man. "You think you are different?" he shouted, eyes wild with fear. "You think you can dance with the wolf and not bring blood on our doorstep?" I told him I was an adult. He told me I was a child, playing with matches in a house soaked in gasoline. We didn't speak for months after that, and the distance between us became just another casualty of my choice. 7. The child I didn't know. Years passed in that half-life. We never spoke about marriage. We never spoke about children. How can you plan a future with a man who doesn't officially exist? Then, one cold morning, I woke up with a familiar, nauseating feeling. I'd felt it before, once, long ago, when I was 19 and had lost a baby at 8 weeks, alone, in a bathroom without anyone knowing. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my shaking hands. Number. Not now. Not with him. I bought a test, the cheap kind you hide under your groceries, and hope the cashier doesn't notice. I took it in silence, in the bathroom of yet another rented flat, under yet another false name. Positivo. Positive. I sat on the floor and laughed, then cried, then laughed again. When he came home that night, I had rehearsed the words 100 times. I said none of them. Instead, I just handed him the little white stick. He looked at it, then at me. "Is this a joke?" he asked. I shook my head. Something passed across his face then. Not joy, not anger, fear. Not like the fear of the police, not like the fear of betrayal. A deeper, more dangerous fear. The fear of being responsible for something innocent. How long? He asked. 8 weeks, maybe. He sat down slowly. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked lost. Alessia, he said, you know what my life is. I know, I replied, but this is our life. Mine and his. Or hers. He rubbed his face with both hands. I can barely protect myself, he muttered. How can I protect a child? We can figure it out. Figure it out? He almost shouted. There is no figuring it out when your father is the most wanted man in Italy. I flinched. Silence fell between us like a curtain. Finally, he stood. There are things I need to arrange, he said. I need time. Time. The one thing he was always short on. He left that night. He didn't come back for months. I learned to go to doctor appointments alone. I learned to lie to the midwife about my husband working abroad. I learned what loneliness really feels like. Not just being without someone, but carrying part of them inside you while they acted like you were invisible. When our daughter was born, he wasn't there. The nurse asked me, Father's name? The pen hovered over the form. I thought of his real name, the one on all those wanted posters. I thought of the false ones he used to sign apartment leases. I finally wrote, unknown. It was both a lie and the most honest thing I'd ever said. He visited once, when she was 10 weeks old. He held her like she was made of glass. He didn't kiss her. He didn't say her name. He just stared at her with an expression I couldn't read. What did you name her? He asked. Lucia, I said, after my grandmother. Lucia, he repeated softly. For a moment, the boss vanished, and I saw just a man holding his child. Then his phone rang. He handed her back to me like she was a burning coal. I have to go, he said. Will you come back? I asked. He didn't answer. And in that silence, I understood. A man who can't exist in the daylight cannot be a father. Not really. So I raised Lucia alone. I told her her father was away. I told her he loved her in his own way. I never told her his name. That was my choice. One I still wrestle with. 8. The years of smoke. As the years rolled by, his legend grew. Every few months, there'd be a new raid on some hideout somewhere in Sicily. Helicopters, cameras, politicians standing in front of microphones promising, this time we will get him. They never did. People said he lived like a king, moving between villas, always surrounded by women. Others said he was dying of some illness, hiding in cellars like a rat. The truth was somewhere in between. Sometimes, he'd appear in my life like a ghost slipping through a crack. A phone call from a number that worked only once. A message sent through a friend of a friend. Once in a while, a visit. Always unannounced. Always brief. You could tell the police, he'd say lightly sometimes, pouring himself a drink. Imagine a woman turning in the boss. They'd make you a saint. Don't joke, I'd snap. But we both knew he wasn't really joking. He knew I could destroy him. I knew he could destroy me. The balance of terror kept us together longer than love. And yet, when he was there, he was tender. He'd ask about Lucia's grades. He'd listen when I talked about nothing, the weather, the price of olive oil, the neighbor's cat. We'd drink coffee in silence. Two people sitting in a room full of ghosts. Once, after a particularly bad raid somewhere near Trapani, I asked him, "Do you ever regret it?" He didn't pretend not to understand. Regret what? Your life. All of it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Regret is a luxury for people who think they could have done things differently, he said. In my world, every choice is a chain. Once you pull one link, the rest comes with it. That's not an answer. He looked at me, tired. I regret, he said slowly, that you can never tell Lucia who I am. Not really. It was the closest thing to remorse I ever heard from him, and it came too late. 9. The sickness. The first time I heard he was sick, it was from the news, not from him. Sources suggest the fugitive boss may be undergoing treatment for a serious illness, the anchor said, in that same detached tone. Possibly cancer. I laughed, bitterly. Of course. Of course, the man who had escaped bullets and manhunts for decades would be betrayed by his own body in the end. A few days later, a stranger came to my door. Middle-aged, nervous, smelling faintly of antiseptic. "Are you Alessia?" he asked. My heart stopped. Who wants to know? "I'm a doctor," he said. "A friend of a friend." I let him in. He handed me a folded note. In Matteo's handwriting, 3 lines. "If I die, it will be on my feet, not in a hole. Don't be afraid. Take care of our daughter. No greeting, no goodbye, no explanation." The doctor told me what the note didn't. Stage 4, colon cancer, metastasis. He refused regular treatment for years, the doctor said. Too risky, too many documents, too many names. Now it may be too late. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, voice shaking. "Because he asked me to," the man replied. "And because, Signora, a man like him doesn't ask for much. When he does, it's serious." He left me with that. For the first time in years, I considered going to the police. Not out of revenge, out of mercy. For him, for his victims, for myself. I didn't know. I just knew that this was going to end soon, one way or another. And I did not want my daughter to one day see his face on the news labeled "arrested" while surrounded by idiots still pretending not to know who he is. I don't know what I wanted. A quiet ending. There is no quiet ending for men like him. 10. The clinic. You know how it ended? January 2023. The news broke like a bomb. After 30 years on the run, Mafia boss Matteo Messina Denaro has been arrested in Palermo. Videos flooded the internet. A private clinic, a frail man in designer clothes and a wool cap, being led away by police. People shouting, "Brutto animale!" Ugly animal. Cops holding him by the arms. He didn't resist. He walked upright. For the first time in decades, the Phantom had a body everyone could see. I watched the footage in silence, my hands numb. That was him. Older, thinner, sick, but him. My first thought was not, "They got him." It was, he must have known this would happen. Because a man like him does not walk into a clinic under his own name without understanding the risk. He chose that ending: public, inevitable, visible. He no longer wanted to be a ghost. He wanted the story to have a final chapter. For days, the media feasted. Interviews, documentaries, old judges crying with relief, politicians boasting, people in Castelvetrano saying, "We always knew it would happen." No one asked about the woman who'd loved him. Not that I expected them to. Women like me are footnotes in stories like his. The day after his arrest, the police came to my door. 2 men, 1 woman, all serious, all polite. "Signora, we have some questions." Of course they did. "How long have you known him? Did you ever help him? Did you know about his hideouts? Did you know he was sick?" I answered carefully. Truth mixed with omission. "Yes, I knew him." "No, I didn't know details." "Yes, I knew he was ill." "No, I never helped him escape." "Helped him?" I had begged him to let me save him. He had walked into the lion's mouth himself. "Did you ever fear him?" one officer asked quietly when the others stepped out. I looked at him, at his perfectly ironed shirt, at his clean hands, at his earnest eyes. "Yes," I said, "but not in the way you think." He nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did. 11. Telling Lucia. My daughter was 16 when they arrested him. She came home from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, earphones in. "Did you see the news?" I asked. She shrugged. "About what?" I hesitated. "Sit down," I said. She frowned, dropped her bag, sat at the kitchen table. I turned on the TV. They were replaying the footage again, over and over. The old man being led out of the clinic, the journalist shouting, "LA? And Matteo Messina Denaro? Is it you?" His faint half smile. I muted the sound. "Do you recognize him?" I asked. She squinted. "No. Should I?" I swallowed. "That man," I said slowly, "is your father." The world seemed to hold its breath. Lucia stared at me, then at the screen, then at me again. "I don't understand," she said. "Neither do I replied honestly. "Not completely. But it's the truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "You told me he was working abroad," she whispered. "I told you what I could bear," I said. "The rest, I told myself I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" she choked. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up not knowing why your father never calls? Never visits? To think maybe he just didn't want me?" "He did," I insisted, "in his own way. But his life, his choices." She stood abruptly. "No," she said, "you don't get to do that. You don't get to make him tragic now that he's caught. He chose this. You chose him. I didn't choose any of it." She stormed into her room, slamming the door. I sat at the table and watched Mateo's face on repeat, my heart a stone. Father, boss, ghost, now prisoner. Later that night, Lucia emerged, eyes red, jaw set. "Is he dangerous?" she asked. "Yes." "Did he kill people?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said. "Maybe not with his own hands every time, but with his orders, his decisions." "Yes, people died because of him." She absorbed that. "Then I don't want to meet him," she said. "You don't have to." I replied. No one can force you. You're going to, though, aren't you? She asked. I didn't answer. I'm not a child, she said. You don't have to hide from me that you still love him. Her words cut deeper than any judge's verdict ever could.